Hey, what's up everybody? Clayton here with Go Analytics, and today I have another trick video for you. Today we're creating a histogram and cumulative frequency distribution chart. So let's get started. Hey, welcome to our YouTube channel. If you're finding us for the first time, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications to stay up to date on all of our data visualization and data analysis videos. Alright, so today we're talking about creating a histogram and cumulative frequency distribution chart in Power BI. And this is something that's really important when you're trying to make decisions off of your data. So if you're looking at things like just the average or the median, you might end up making the wrong decisions if you're not being very careful with how your data is distributed. So this chart is a really important one, especially when you have data that's not normally distributed across your data set. So let's take an example, and this is what we're going to be working on. A company that has sales reps and they have quota for these reps, and whether a rep achieves their quota or not. We can see the distribution of that and make different decisions off of that. So let's say, maybe the average rep is achieving, 80% of their quota, but a lot of reps are on the lower end, not achieving, maybe they're achieving only 20%. And then we have a couple of top performers here that are achieving above 100%. And then that's where you get your average right in that 80%. But if you're just making off decisions off of that 80%, it sounds like things are good. 80% of our reps are achieving their quota. But that's not necessarily the truth when we look at the distribution. So you know how we like to do it. Let's head on over to my laptop and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so here we are in Power BI desktop, and this is kind of what we're working towards. So we want to create a chart that gives us our histogram. So the histogram here is given by the bars, and then we want a line to give us our cumulative distribution. So that's this line here. So as you can see, it's always going to end up at 100%. So 100% of our reps met 151% or more of their quota. So I can see from this chart in each of these buckets here of our quota attainment. So how much of our quota each rep was able to attain. I can see how many reps were able to achieve that. So in Q2 here, so I'm looking at 2022 Q2, we can see that 6 reps met between 91 to 100% of their quota. Likewise, I can see how many reps met 61 to 70% and how many reps met over 150%, for example. And this cumulative distribution line, essentially it's a running total of the percentage of our reps that met the quota at each interval here. So I can see, at about 78% of our reps had achieved 91 to 100% of their quota in this chart here. All right, so let's get started. I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're working towards, but let's work now backwards to see how we can get this chart, because it does take a little bit of coding here. So I'm going to open up the Power Query editor just so we can take a look at the data at first. So here's the data that we're working with. So we have our rep names. We have a column here for the fiscal year and quarter, their quota for that quarter, and how much quota credit they were assigned, and then how much was their quota attainment. So this quota attainment essentially is just the quota credit divided by their quota. So we went through the steps here just to promote the headers and change the data types for the appropriate data types here. But we need to add we need to add 2 columns here before we get started on our DAX measures. So the first column that we need to add is we'll call them the attainment buckets. So that's just a way for us to group the attainment, the quota attainment here in 10 percentage point intervals. So we can see how many people were able to achieve between 0 and 10% of their quota, how many were able to achieve between 10 and 20%, and so on, all the way. Our maximum here that we're allowing is 150% or higher. So let's get started with creating that measure. So I'm going to go here to add column, and I'm going to choose a custom column. So my column here is going to be called attainment buckets. And it's going to be fairly simple. It's just a way for us to group our data. So it's going to say, if our quota attainment is less than or equal to 0.1 here, which is 10%, then we're going to say it's 0 to 10%. And I'll go ahead and code this all the way down until we're at 150%. Okay, so after I'm done coding all of the different categories here, I need an else statement. So if anything else fails, so else I'm just gonna say other. And that would be able to identify if I've made a mistake in my coding if I see that there's any other, because they all should be falling into these categories. And then I'm able to click OK. And now, as you can see here, we have our attainment buckets falling in based on the quota attainment here. So if we see here, this person got 122%, so the bucket is 121 to 130. The next measure that we need to create is an attainment order. So this is going to be important for us to visualize it and to be able to sort our different attainment buckets here. Because by default, Power BI will just take a look at the numbers and put them in sort of alphabetical order, so to speak. So 100 would come before 21%, for example, because the first digit is a 1, the second digit is and in this case here, the first digit is a 2. So we need to actually be able to say that 0 to 10% is the first one that we want in our visuals, and then 10 to 20%, and so on. So let's just create another measure that creates this attainment order. So I'm going to go to custom and create a new column here. And I'll call this column attainment order. And again, this is going to be fairly simple. It's just if our attainment is less than or equal to 0.1, and then I'm going to say 0.1. And I'll go ahead and do this for all of the buckets that we have in our data here. again, I need an else statement right after I'm done. So I will say else, I just put in 99, which would just mean that anything that falls outside of this would go right to the end. And pay close attention to this last line here because this is the clause here in the if statement that if it's greater than 150%, then this is what it should assign for our attainment order. So I'm able to click OK. And now we have our attainment order column here that assigns essentially a sequence to our attainment orders. So that's all that we need to do to our data here. And now we're ready to go into the Power BI desktop app and start to create our DAX measures. So I'm going to click Close and Apply here. And the first measure that we're going to need here is going to be a measure to count the number of employees. So I'm just going to duplicate this page here, and I'm going to get rid of these measures for now and leave it completely blank for now. All right, so let's get started on our DAX measures. So the first one is going to be our count of employees. So I'm going to start a new measure here, and I'll call it count of employees. And this is just going to use a function inside of Power BI called distinct count. So we're going to use the distinct count function here, and we're going to pass in our rep name in there. So essentially what this measure does is it just counts the distinct names for our reps inside of our data set here. So we're going to keep it as a whole number for the format, and I like to add a little 1,000 separator, but that's just a matter of preference. Okay, and the next, so we essentially, all we need is two measures here. One being the count of employees, and the second one being essentially our cumulative percentage distribution. Given that this measure is a little bit more complex, we're going to break it into three different measures first, and then we'll put it all together using variables. So our first measure that we are going to need is a maximum attainment. So I'm going to create a new measure here, and I'll call it max attainment. And these are, I'm just calling them as auxiliary measures for now. We'll put them all together at the end, but it's nice to break it up into different measures first so that we can really understand what's going on. So the first measure here is just the maximum value. So we're going to use the max function of the attainment order. So this is that column that we created that essentially assigns a number based on the attainment that the rep achieved. So this is going to be useful when we're filtering our data so that it creates that cumulative distribution or that running total. So we first will need this measure. So I'm going to apply it. And then the next measure that we need is a count of all the reps that we have in each quarter. So we want to eliminate any type of filtering that happens to the count of employees. So we already created this count of employees, but this would take into account any sort of filtering that we do. So even if there was any type of filtering done on the quota or the quota attainment, it would take that into consideration. So we need a function here or a measure that only takes into account the fiscal year and quarter and eliminates any other filtering so that we have a true count of how many reps we have in total, regardless of how many achieve their quota or not. So let's get started on that measure. I'm going to create a new measure here. And this measure, we're just gonna call it all reps. And for this measure, I'm going to use the calculate function. So I'm passing in our count of employees into the calculate function. And if you recall, the calculate function takes two expressions, or it takes an expression and any number of filtering criteria. So we're going to pass our count of employees as our expression. And for our filtering criteria, we're going to use the all except function. And what this function does is it essentially keeps, it takes all of the data and it only applies the filter to the column that we identify under this all except function. So I'm going to first pass in a table name. So we only have this one table, the dummy quota attainment data, and then I have to give it a column. So the column that I do want the filtering to apply to is called the FY-Q. So what this is going to do now, it's going to give me the count of employees, regardless of any type of filtering, except for the filtering on the fiscal year and quarter. So I'm going to click the check mark here and apply it. And now we're ready to create the cumulative frequency measure. So I'm going to start a new measure here. And we'll call it cumulative frequency. And the first function that we're going to use here is going to be the calculate function. And the expression that we're passing through the calculate function, again, is going to be the count of employees. And now we need to do some filtering to the count of employees. So I'm going to use the filter function and the all except function so that we still take in our FYQ column without applying, but we're still applying our filtering to this FYQ. And then the other filter, the filter expression. So this essentially, breaking it down, what the filter function is going to do is we pass in a table into it, and this is our table. So our table essentially passes all of the data, and the only filtering that it applies is the fiscal year and quarter, so that we can add it to a slicer and be able to say, okay, in FY22, we had these number of reps, and this is their quota and their quota attainment and all of that. And now we need to pass in a filter expression. So how do we want to filter this table? And by this table, I mean this expression, which is a table. It will return a table. And the last thing that we need to do is just to filter it to where the attainment order would be less than the max attainment function that measure that we created. So I'm going to pass that in. It's going to be our attainment order, and it will filter it to where it's less than or equal to our max attainment here. So this is how we create that running total or that cumulative distribution, is that we are passing in this filter so that in the context of the visual, if the attainment order is less than or equal to the maximum attainment order for that one, then it will sum it up. Otherwise, it will not. So if we're looking at, for example, an attainment order of 1, which it would be 100%, it will sum up anything less than or equal to 100%, but it would not take into account anything after 100%. And now we got to close some parentheses here. This is sometimes the bane of my existence, is not closing the parentheses correctly, but hopefully we've done it correctly here. So it doesn't seem like we have any errors. And the last piece then would just be to take this cumulative frequency and divide it by the total number of reps. So we could either do that as a new measure, just taking that division. But now, now that we've gone through all of this, let's put it all together into one nice measure. So I'm going to create a new measure here. And let's call it cumulative frequency. So cumulative frequency. And we're going to use variables here to put it all together. So the first variable is going to be our max attainment, and this is exactly what we just did prior. So it's just putting it all into one nice little measure here. And then our next variable will be that all reps variable. And our last variable will be that cumulative frequency measure that we created. And I just noticed a mistake here, so let's fix that. There we go. All right, so now our last argument here would be our return, what we wanted to return. And we just will pass in the divide function, and we'll divide the cumulative frequency variable by the all reps. And I want the variable here, not the measure. And now we can click OK here to submit it. And we'll change the format to a whole number. And now let's take a look at this. So now we have all the measures that we need. And I'm just going to minimize this chart for a second here. And I'm going to put in a table. And in our table, the first thing I will throw in there will be our attainment buckets. And as you can see, our attainment buckets right now are sorted in order, but that's because I had already done it previously. What you would first need to do before this actually sorts in order is to select this column, and under the column tools, go to sort by. And we need to sort it by the attainment order, because by default it's going to be sorting by itself, and this is what you would end up with. So you'd end up with the plus 151% at the top, so none of this makes sense, it's not in order. So let's go ahead and sort that by the attainment order. And now we are able to put in our count of employees here. So now we see that we have a total number of 23 employees for the 2022 Q2 here. And we are able to actually see how many employees are meeting those quota. So if you recall, let's go back here again just to our initial chart. We see here that sales reps were between 91 to 100%. So now we take a look at this, and perfect, look at that, 6 sales reps are achieving 91 to 100% of their quota. So that's great. And the final touch to this would be to put in our cumulative frequency into this table here. And if we did everything correctly, it should be 100%. And let us change this not to a whole number, but to a percentage. And now we can see how it's a running total. So 4% of our reps, so 1 out of 23 achieved between 0 and 10%. And then you would do the running total. So for example, between 21 to 30% would be 4 reps out of 23 reps. So that's 17%, all the way until we get to our 23 reps here at 100%. And to put this all together now into our chart here to create that histogram and cumulative distribution chart, we would just need to put the count of employees into our y-axis. And I'm using a line and clustered column chart here for this. So I would put the number of employees into these buckets. So I have the attainment buckets in the x-axis, and then in the column y-axis, we have the count of employees. And then for our line, which is our cumulative distribution, we would just use that cumulative frequency measure that we created. And there we have it. So now we get that nice histogram and cumulative distribution line combination chart, which allows us to make decisions. You know, I can see there's a few top performers here, but you know, for this quarter, a lot of our employees were sort of meeting our target. But if I look at different quarters here, for example, in quarter 1, you know, I can see that most of our reps, almost 80% here. So if I hover over it, you know, 70% of our reps here were reaching between 0 and 70% of their quota only. So there was less of our reps here meeting 100% or more of their quota. So that's it. That's how you can create a histogram and cumulative frequency distribution chart in Power BI. I know it takes a little bit of maneuvering, a little bit of coding, but it is something that definitely will improve your decision making when you're taking a look at your data inside of Power BI. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and be sure to subscribe to our channel so that you're always up to date on all of our latest videos, and we'll see you in the next video.